Okay, welcome to the June 2nd, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to do a quick mic check, make sure everything is working okay. We'll let people get logged in. And if you haven't attended a Hangout before, basically how it's going to work is you could ask questions in the comments field. You could also mail questions in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. We're going to let people get logged in. If you're watching this not live, you may want to skip ahead to maybe about 10 minutes and we'll let people get logged in and we'll get everyone kind of and if you want to enter comments, if you have questions, you could enter them in the comments field in the chat area. So you could do that. And if you want to, we'll just try to go through as many as chronologically as we can. The Hangout today will be a little bit shorter as I have a meeting I have to be on at about 2.5 hours. So we'll probably go about 2.5 hours as opposed to our usual 3 or 4, depending on the Hangout. So I'll apologize, but we'll try to do a normal length one on Friday. And if you want to, feel free to introduce yourself. If you're watching this live, feel free to introduce yourself in the comments field. Tell us where you're from. And we will get started here in a few minutes. My name is Greg Ondo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a Steinberg specialist. And I'm broadcasting from outside Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. So if you want to tell us where you're from, and if you want to leave your questions in the chat field, we'll do that. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. It doesn't help if you leave the same question over and over again repeatedly. So if you just could leave your question once, that will really kind of cut down on a lot of the unnecessary traffic and can make the Hangout go a little faster as we get through more questions. So we'll go ahead and let people get logged in. And I'm just going to do an audio test here. All right, so that sounds like it's coming through. Okay, so just go ahead and we have some people already had submitted questions. That's great. Okay, so let's go ahead and see where some people are getting logged in from. Just reading some of the questions. Good to see Jan from Stockholm. Hope I'm saying your name right. It's usually how I believe it's pronounced in Europe for more Nordic countries. All right, so we have Hampshire, Vancouver. All right, so we have Brooklyn. Okay, so we have Millard from Pennsylvania. Okay, so just see from Ernesto, what creative effects does it have? If you could maybe specify a little bit more, there's, you could use any, pretty much all the plugins could be used creatively, but that would be helpful. All right, so more people from Brooklyn. All right, so Portugal, England, Liverpool, Milwaukee. All right, and probably like many of you, my wife is at home working above me, and my son is home from, he's in his last week of school, so we will probably get disrupted, and there is a new house that's being built next to me, and then they have like a little Bobcat tractor outside my window, looks like they're getting closer to being done, and maybe they're trying to lay the sod, so getting the grass all set up for that, so you may hear some noise. I'll apologize in advance for interruptions and noise you may hear in the background. Okay, just seeing some more questions and getting people logged in. All right, so we have Sweden, Portugal, Finland, Hampshire, right, UK, Greater London. We seem to always have a strong UK contingent. Okay, so we have Sherman Oaks. Okay, he says he's seen some questions and chopping vocals. Weatherford, Texas. Switzerland, Brussels, Norway. All right, so India, Texas, Italy. Saudi Arabia. Okay, we'll check time. Some more people are getting logged in. We'll get started in our couple minutes. We have Tanzania, Germany, Atlanta, Rochester, Florida, Bulgaria. All right. So just a couple more people. We have more people getting logged in. Also, we'll try to have the index up of the Hangout up later tonight. We have Indonesia. It's probably very late there, or very, very early. South of France. All right, so South Shield, England. All right, so we'll go ahead and check our time. Maybe another 30 seconds and we'll go ahead and get started. So again, you could leave your questions in the comments field in the chat area. Or you could always email them in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so I have Holland checking in. Zambia. Okay, so let me just jump back over here. And let's go ahead and get started. So Okay, so adjust my microphone a little bit. Hi, Greg. I can't open any types of video in Cubase 10.5. How can I solve this problem? You know, most video types can be opened. Yeah, I've seen some maybe some from cell phones that you may have to convert. But if you go to, I think I have the web page up here. Just look for the video support in, if you just Google this, video support in Nuendo, Cubase, Wavelab, and Dorico. This will show you all the different, and video files they're significantly different than a WAV file, which will play back in basically any application. But what you want to do is make sure that you have the codec. The codec is very critical, and a container type. So here you could see, all the supported video formats, all the containers and codecs that will work. So most people, you can kind of use this as a reference point. So often you may just have to simply go through and convert it. And there's a number of shareware utilities that could allow you to convert to one of the common video editing codecs and containers that would be supported in Cubase. All right, so let's jump back. Okay, question. Can you explain to us how to save and change MIDI percussion drum loops in Groove Agent 5 SE, and where can we find it if we make our own MIDI loops? Thanks. So let's say if I've made a new MIDI loop. And I'll just load up a kit quickly. All right, so let's say if I'm here now and I wanted to, once we have a kit that's actually assigned here, one of the things, if it's going to a virtual instrument, you have the option to just kind of double click here, and let's just create kind of quickly in our drum editor. And let me just hide this down. And I'll just have this automatically create the drum map. So let's say I've made just a Now let's say this is my drum loop. So if I wanted to take this as a MIDI loop, what I could do is I could just simply export this as a MIDI loop. So we go to export. You could choose to do a MIDI loop, and we'll just call this June 2nd, 2020. And then when you go to come back over here, we could just look through different loops and samples. So if we wanted to just kind of jump over here, you could go into user presets. I think, let's just see if there's the MIDI loops are in there. I may have to refresh. So here's my June 2nd, 2020 loop, and I could just drag that in. That will automatically load up an instance of Groove Agent, and we'll play back the same exact part. So if we wanted to look at this part versus this part, we could view them both in the drum editor here. So what you have with a MIDI loop is that will contain the instrument with all of its sounds, plus the actual data within it, so that as opposed to a MIDI file, which isn't attached to a particular instrument, this would load up the correct instrument with the sounds, and it will work for VST instruments. So try just going to your file to export to MIDI loop once you have that set. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, the other day my brain quit on me. I was simply trying to mix my music stereo file against the effects dialogue video track without effects affecting the effects track, balancing my volumes. You couldn't figure out how to separate the effects from the master. I tried the monitor reference trick, but could only sell the effects via the monitor AB. Is there a way to mix and hear both AB? I'm sorry if this sounds confusing. It's probably just a schoolboy error. Perhaps I want to use a group channel. So if you wanted to have, let me just pull up a couple audio files here. I'll just drag some of these in. So say we have two different ambiances. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to reread this, make sure I'm understanding. So you want to separate the effects from the master. I tried the monitor reference trick. So I think what you could do if you're running into a situation like that, you could definitely try groups, but there's also this thing called direct routing. So let's say if I have this track going to a group. So let's just see if I have like this audio file here. And let me just take a separate audio file, something completely different. Like that. And I wanted to be able to kind of hear both of those and kind of add them in kind of a comparison. Something that you may try is just, again, using groups as you indicated. So you could try coming over here, go to add tracks. I wanted to add a group to the selected channel. And we'll make it a stereo group. I'll give it a name and we'll call this source pad. And maybe we'll add a group to this and we'll just call this an impact. So just right click, we'll add a group channel to the selected channel and I'll just call this a stereo impact. And I'll duplicate this a couple times here. So as we wanted to do this, we'll go into our mix console, and you could do this if you go to the full screen mix console and not sample editor. Sorry about that. Let's just come to the mix console here. And something that may help in this scenario is using the direct routing. So you want to make sure that you have from this little drop-down menu, direct routing summing on. And as we do this, let's come over to, and in our racks, make sure that we have direct routing enabled. So I could take these two different sources, and if I wanted to, send both of those two different groups, we could at this point just kind of switch between these two different groups here. So this way you have, this would allow you to actually monitor between two different tracks. So if we had, let's send this group track to another group track. hang on 1 second. My son's knocking on the door. Okay, so sorry about that. So let's add a group track to the to this channel here. And then just kind of switch between the two different groups here. And that way you could kind of add it in. So I think that would allow you to do, so try setting it up as two different groups. And then maybe on your master group, we could just say, okay, I want this group going, let's say to, your master group out. And then you could just kind of A/B between the direct routing, but make sure that you have this summing mode turned on. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, question, how to add an existing group channel to existing tracks at once. So we may just notice that we kind of did that here. So let's come over here. So let's say if I have a number of audio tracks, let's say 12 audio tracks here, and I wanted to add a group channel to all of these, I could select them, right click, and we click on add track, and let's choose group channel to selected tracks. And now we could we'll call this new group, or we'll call it like maybe drum bus. And at this point, that will automatically be routed. All these new channels that were added, and we go into their routing. So we'll come over here. We can see that these have now all been added into our drum bus for the 12 channel. So whatever you have selected, just simply right click and add track and effects channel to selected channels. Okay, reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great mics. See, it's 109 degrees in Scottsdale, Arizona, so it's very hot. Okay, so question, could you touch on the steps needed to chop a rap vocal track into individual words that could then be quantized and snapped to notes in separate MIDI drum track? So an easy way of doing this is kind of with Groove Agent. So let's say if I add a new instance of Groove Agent, and I'll just kind of come over here, look for a quick vocal.
Oh, just smash, turn it up. I'm coming to get your ass up, get up. We're keeping it real, let's go, keeping it real, we're keeping it real, what?
All right, so I'll just take that, and let's say I have all of this directly on one pad. So you could just drag this onto Groove Agent, and we'll have our...
We're keeping it real, let's go, keeping it real, we're keeping it real, what?
So if I wanted to kind of do like a quick vocal chop, we can now just come right over here. Let's click on Slice. And then you could create slices, and you could adjust kind of the threshold of this. So if you wanted this to be fewer thresholds, and now every time that you would play one of these, let me adjust my octave on my controller here. So
keeping it go, real, keep it real.
And so you could just basically just do, and you could set up each word if you wanted to, so you could set your own slice points if you wanted to do that. I know some people will also just kind of take this as an audio file in the project, so if you wanted to do it more manually, you could, let's just go ahead and just cut all pads. So if you wanted to just say, I want just that onto, let's put it onto just a quick instrument track here. So just make this a little larger so we can see directly from. So there's lots of people that will do this, and I'll just take my snap, make sure that's off by hitting letter J, dragging that. So using my range tool just to select the range and drag that into Groove Agent. So now you can
keep
so you could just kind of very easily take, your different samples here. So let's say if I drag that.
Real. Keep real. Keep real.
And then if you wanted to even, I think we could take it here.
We're keeping it real. Let's go. Keeping it real. We're keeping it real.
So that's kind of a couple different ways. So you could do kind of the drag it over to a pad and then just do the slicing, or just kind of manually taking a vocal part and just dropping it in using the range selection tool, and you could drop it into each of the pads independently there as well. So there's two different methods to do it really quickly in Groove Agent, and then you can just start sequencing like you would normally do. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so still going through some introductions here. So question, is there a single way to turn off all inserted effects to hear raw versus finished? So if you wanted to do it on a track by track basis, so if I have a number of different insert effects going on, if I hold down the Alt key, I think, and click here. No, it's, sorry, I'll cancel that. That would get rid of them all. But I think if I click on, I think that there's a way to, let me see if I could, I think there's a modifier key. Let me take a quick look. Yeah, so if you want to do it on a track by track basis, you could click just to the left of inserts here. And within the mix console, if you want to do it for all tracks simultaneously, you can come over here, and at the top, you'll see inserts, EQs, channel strips, and you have to hold down the Alt key. And then you could click right here to bypass all of your inserts without a modifier key rather, but you could enable your or bypass all inserts by clicking here. So if you wanted to bypass all your inserts, EQs, channel strips, or sends, you could just do that directly from there. So you could do it on a channel by channel basis, again, by just clicking to the left of the insert tab there, or on the full screen mix console, just by clicking here and just kind of holding the mouse down. Okay, so just seeing, hi, hello, Greg. Supports 4K and other DAWs is okay. So currently the video resolution that we have for the video playback will be just a 1080p. So you may have to just use a freeware or shareware converter down to, so it's not really intended to be a 4K video playback. So you may want to just make sure that you're working at a 1080p resolution. I believe that's what will work the best for system performance as well. Okay, so question, can't access my VST from Cubase, like my T guitar, even though I'm e-licensed and it shows up, but no sounds are there. So let's say I'll just show you. So, T guitar will work as part of Halion Sonic SE or Halion Sonic or Halion. So when we go to add a track, let's just add an instrument track. And I'll go to Halion Sonic SE because everyone has that. I will choose the T guitar. We'll load the preset here. And let's go to the edit screen. So if you want to put this in, or you can put it into chord mode. And you could also go to patterns. So when I play a chord here, I'll just hit E minor chord. So once you kind of play the patterns here, so you could kind of put it into, so if you see the T guitar, make sure that you're actually loading it into Halion Sonic SE, and it's not necessarily just a standalone instrument. It's a standalone library that works within the Halion family. So make sure that you're opening it that way. And you should see it like when you go to load a sound and you go to your instrument sets, you should see the T guitar kind of listed there. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so question, have you some ideas how to print or to get a file over installed plugins and VST instruments installed in Cubase 10.5 Pro? So I'm not sure if I understand. I think maybe this is from Jan. If you wanted to ask, so let's see, how to print or get a file over installed plugins and VST instruments installed. Okay, so how to print or get a, so let's see, or file over installed, plugins and VST instruments installed. So I'm not sure if I understand the question. I think this is from Jan. Maybe if you could ask it really quickly again, we can see if we can catch up to it. Okay, so we see a question. I would like to move the installation of Cubase. So it's probably best to keep Cubase where it is actually installed. And if you are running low on hard disk space, probably what you want to do is to access the Steinberg library manager. So let me just kind of come over here real quick. And we can show you this utility program. So if you go to your Steinberg library manager, what you could do is basically with all the content, and that's the great number of files. So when you come here is just to come over here and move, and then you could pick a location where you want to move your content to. So this will work for kind of all your groove agent, your Hallian sounds, pad shop sounds, Retrolog library. So all the different content. So I would try to keep the main application because it's going to look for particular drivers on the operating system level for some things. But if you are running low on hard disk space, try to just move the content, and this will keep the content linked with the program so that when you go to open up an instrument, it knows where to look for the particular files. All right, let's move on. Okay, just reading through. All right, so people still introduction. So question, with Groove Agent, is there any way to consolidate the samples used if not in the project folder? So let me just... So if it's, I don't know of a way to do that. If you're trying to not, if you wanted to not load up the samples, if not in the project, there may be, let me just check something. So if you had a large kit and let's say you had 32 different velocity layers on snare and you use 3 of those velocity layers, you could click on RAM save. And what RAM save will allow you to do is you could play the project back and it'll figure out what samples weren't being used and will automatically unload those samples for you. So that could free up a lot of memory, but I don't know of a way to, of it for really to consolidate of it to do that with samples. But if the sample wasn't being used to play back in a project, a RAM save mode could unload those from your particular project there. Okay, I'm struggling to understand why the chord pads don't correspond to the allotted keys on my MIDI keyboard in Arcturus key step. So let's go ahead and take a quick look.
We're keeping it real, keeping it real. Let's go, keeping it real. We're keeping it real. What?
Sorry about that. All right, so let's put it on. All right, so as soon as I come here, so these will be just, you can see the chord range here. So once I have the chord track, so I'm just hitting this particular range on my MIDI controller. So if it's not working with your Arturia key step, make sure that you're in the right octave. Because if I switched my octaves on my controller here, now it seems like the right octave isn't actually the correct octave, and I go down to the right octave. So just make sure that you have the actual correct octave, and especially if a lot of controllers, maybe if you have a 49 or 25 key, you may just have to switch the octave. But I think once you do that it will make sense and will align for you. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. How and when would I use the automation panel? So the automation panel will allow you to do a number of different things, So, and you can open the automation panel by hitting F6 on your computer keyboard. So as soon as I click here, I can see this will allow you to, to set up different punch points. So if you always wanted it to, let's just set up a particular automation. Let's do a new project here so we don't have a lot of musical nonsense going on. So there's some handy things that you could do in here. I'll just All right, so if I wanted to just automate a particular parameter, so there's some good things found in the settings. So one of these could be the reveal parameter on right, and also show data on tracks, which is helpful. So now if I wanted to see the automation, if I want to see the waveform of the particular track in automation, underneath, that's a helpful option. So, if I wanted to draw in automation points, we could have that reference with the waveform. If I've done different types of automation besides just volume, under settings, if you go reveal parameter on right, so let's say if I have my channel strip open and I'm automating everything here. Now, anytime that I adjust a parameter, those parameters will automatically open up in as automation lanes. So you don't have to go searching for different parameters. There's also some really handy fill modes. So let's say if I just wanted to see different volume automation. So if I'm doing a large project and I just haven't gotten, I'm in the middle of the project, you could have different fill modes. So you could say, okay, I'm in the third verse, but I just haven't touched on this track yet for automation. So I can say fill to start and move that, and that will write that automation value to the start of the track or to the end or within the loop. You could also suspend reading and writing of different elements, and that's really helpful here. So let's say if I'm adjusting the volume automation, but I was looking for the EQ but not wanting to automate it, I could adjust my volume here. Then I could adjust the EQ, but the EQ won't be written as automation. So a lot of times people will accidentally be an automation and touch an EQ or an effect, and then realize that they inadvertently wrote that automation. So you could actually come over here and suspend reading and writing of different forms, aspects of automation. Plus, you could say, I only want to see volume or panning or EQ, dynamics. So those are a couple of things that the automation panel could be useful for and kind of speeding up your workflow. Okay, so let's say, okay, so we have a question. Moving MIDI notes, Control plus arrows always seems to move in quantized increments, even with snap turned on. How can I move notes without quantize affecting it infinitely to the nth degree? All right, so I think when you do that, that's actually nudging it. So I'm just gonna come over. So that's just gonna be like the nudge command. So that will be kind of tied to a grid regardless. So let me just add a MIDI track here or an instrument track. I'll just take off my step quantize. So, you could freely move events as you want, but I think if we come over here and do that, that's going to, when you choose to kind of do the nudge function, what you're telling it to do is to nudge it based on that rhythmic interval. So let's say if I have this set to quarter note, or if I wanted it to be eighth notes. So the increment that it's nudging the notes when holding down Control or Command plus left or right arrow will be based on that. So if you wanted to, just move notes freely without snap turned on. So even here, let's say I have just that was with my, so when my snap is disabled, and you can do that by hitting the letter J, that's when you could nudge different values and you could choose your different start or end time. And you could go to your transport, to your information line here and just use your mouse scroll wheel to go up and down or freely position notes around. But what you're doing is a nudge command, and that will nudge it an interval based on your quantized value. So if you want to get like really precise, you could just come here and just, freely position everything down to the sample level if you wanted to. Okay. Question. Can you record music played in iTunes on a Mac into Cubase Pro using a UR44C? You could do that. You may just have to do like a loopback function. And sometimes if you want to do that, it's not really the intention of it to work that way. I know some people will take their audio outputs, 1 and 2 for their computer operating system audio here, and then patch that into inputs 3 and 4 and be able to record directly like that. So there's lots of people that will just kind of do, or out of the headphones into 2 more inputs. I'm not sure if it really gets you much anything better. Obviously, the iTunes is going to be kind of probably a compressed format, but you could definitely do that. But it's probably not going to be doing it through like a software way of doing it. I don't think the operating system really allows you to kind of have that work where it's just going to be saying, take from iTunes into this, but you could basically run the iTunes out of certain outputs and take those outputs and record it back into Cubase at the same time. Okay, so hi, when extracting tempo from an audio track, what would stop me from apply smoothing to the tempo? So let me just go ahead and open up in our project. Let's see if I have this one open. So say if I'm doing a tempo detection on this, where it's not lining up to the click. So, and we'll go to project menu and choose the tempo detection. So a lot of times when you're doing a tempo detection of it, you like, then let's go ahead and listen to this. It could really, like, when you don't see the actual smooth tempo, a lot of times you may have some projects that can have some anomalies that can throw off tempo detection, and that's when that will become available. If you think that often it's like, oh, it's not changing every beat per minute like it's indicating, a lot of times it is, and this is pretty hyper accurate. And if you wanted the tempo to be smoothed out, afterwards, what you could do is just kind of actually select some of your tempo information, and you could just kind of go directly, let's say we just select just a little bit of the tempo information. And then if you go to the side, you could choose to kind of smooth out the tempo there if you wanted to. But a lot of times you may not have a case where it needs to do smoothing of tempo, and that's why it's going to be grayed out after doing a tempo detection. Okay, so we have a question. I want to cross grade from Cubase to Nuendo, but I know the next release is just around the corner. Will there be a grace period? Do Steinberg plans on bringing out new features in Nuendo first, then Cubase? Again, we'll have kind of different feature sets. So for some of the functionality, we'll get introduced in Nuendo first and then migrate to Cubase, and some will get introduced into Cubase and migrate to Nuendo. So currently, like the MIDI and music production feature set is in Nuendo is based on Cubase 10 and not Cubase 10.5. I think we'll see some of those maybe coming soon. But, and some features that, eventually make it into Cubase, like the edit mode, for doing videos, AAF support, those will be introduced into Nuendo first and then migrate down to Cubase. So it depends on the feature set of, but sometimes, both Nuendo customers feel and Cubase customers feel that the other one gets, new stuff first. But they could be kind of for different workflow paradigms. So you may just want to wait just a little bit if you want, wait till you see what's coming around a corner And, there's always going to be different promotions that could be going on as well that can make it, financially viable to wait just a little bit. So, okay. So I see question, is it possible to send the MIDI? Sorry, my timeline just jumped. Sorry about that. Hang on. Just scroll down. Okay, question. Is it possible to send the MIDI track created by add instrument track to additional VST instruments? Some reason instrument tracks don't have the ability as easily as MIDI tracks. So if you have an instrument track, and I'll just create a part very quickly. And let's say if I have a MIDI track, so MIDI tracks have the added benefit of being able to, so if I copied that part, MIDI tracks have something called MIDI Sends. So when we go to MIDI Sends, you could just come over here, and one of the tricks is what a MIDI Send will allow you to do is you could send this to multiple MIDI destinations here. Without loading a plugin. So this one track could go to 4 different destinations. What I see a lot of people also do is just kind of come over here and, take a number of tracks. If they wanted to create like a big stacked sound, take a number of those tracks and put them into a folder track. So we could come over here. So we'll say move selected tracks to new folder, and then they could have kind of their instrument stack, and then just hit record, arm that one folder for record, and then they could and then you could record on both tracks, multiple tracks simultaneously within the folder track. So, and if you wanted to expand, you could see kind of the MIDI recording. So with MIDI tracks, you can do it very easily through Send, but you could copy a MIDI track or copy an instrument track to a MIDI track, and then just have this send to multiple destinations, or try putting it into a folder track. It's pretty easy to work with. Okay, so hi Greg. Is it possible to assign the scroll wheel plus Alt, for example, to zoom in and out vertically? For example, I think it will make a lot of sense since Control and scroll wheel do scroll horizontally. So I don't know of a way to do that. So if you hold down Control and zoom, you could do this vertically or horizontally rather. So let me just navigate here. So I'll just hold down Control or Command, and using my scroll wheel, we could do that. But I don't think we could have just a modifier So it currently doesn't work, but I'll pass that along again because I've kind of sent that feature request in before. We could navigate up and down using, the Alt, just using the scroll wheel, but there isn't currently a function I know of that will allow you to do it vertically. So. So let's see, is there a way to link to plugins? It would be especially useful if routing anything dual mono. So let's say if I have an audio track here, let's see if we could do. I don't think there's a way of doing it on a single track, but if you had it on multiple tracks. So I think if we had it on multiple tracks, we could put it into a link group, but I don't think we could do it on a single track. So you can't have, both plugins open. What I've seen some people do is to just save a preset. So let's say if I'm here, and just kind of have the same preset, but I don't know if you have it on multiple tracks, you could do it through a link group, but you can't link a single channel to itself. So that may be the fastest way. Okay, question. When I create a template, can't understand how to write the comments, the tiny text. My workaround is to use a Cubase factory template and modify my tiny text. I'm not sure if the tiny text is, and this may have been related to our question earlier, but maybe it's in the notepads. So maybe make sure that you have the notepad active. And then you could have kind of like your text per track. And you could right click and have different notepads active here. So anytime that you go between MIDI, VST instrument, or audio tracks, you could have all of your notepads. So make sure that when you're doing this, if this is the tiny text that you're working with, so I'm not sure if that's what it is. Make sure that you right click and see the notepads active there. And that could be stored maybe within the template, but maybe not if you're making your own template. Okay, question. Can you quickly show me how to convert monophonic audio to MIDI, please? All right, so we can do this through Very Audio. Just activate this project. I think we have a little old Moog modular in this project. So if I come here and we go to Very Audio, and now at this point, we could go to Functions and choose Extract MIDI. And we have different options for conveying all the pitch bend information. We could retain the dynamic velocity, hit OK. Let me see if we got play somewhere here. Just try this on me. Just try the bass line here. I'll try another file here. I have like a saxophone. All right, get this. So now what I want to do is just actually come over here. We'll do our Very Audio. Now extract MIDI. And that's all you'd have to do there. So, just kind of show you when you play it back, this is what it'll sound like. So that's really kind of all you had to do. So just go to, within the Very Audio, just go to the functions. And then extract MIDI. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. I'm using an old computer with USB 2 and USB 3 ports. Is the UR22C compatible with standard USB for older computers, or I need a USB-C port on my computer? It'll work fine. So it's designed to work with USB 2 ports, and that's why you kind of have a USB-C connector to the interface itself, and then have I think it's what's called a Type A port that can be connected directly to your computer. So you could use it with USB 2, USB 3, USB 3.1. So all those different ports. Let's see, can I post a link to the dedicated video on electric bass? Let me just see if we can just find it really quickly. I think if you just search Steinberg electric bass walkthrough. Let's look at the electric bass instrument from Steinberg. Yeah, so just look for functions walkthrough electric bass VST instrument for Hallian, and that will kind of give you an idea of, and you should be able to find the walkthrough of it. And it's a great plugin. I love that one. And I usually hate all bass stuff because I'm a bass player. Like everyone, their own instruments awful. Okay, question. When using the UR44 in direct monitoring and routing the mic through the QMix, will the QMix mic volume affect the volume of the mic being heard by the singer? Okay. So just let me read through this one more time. So routing the mic through the QMix. Okay, so will the QMix mic volume affect the volume of the mic being heard by the singer? Let's try and make sure if I understand a question right. So say so I understand now. So the Q, so whatever you're sending in the Q mix. So if I come here to this particular audio file, let's say if I go to this channel, and this is my input channel for my mic, and we come over here to the Q sends. So, if you have this all the way down, that will affect, but you want to make sure that you have the Q mix enabled here and turned on, and that volume will affect how much is being heard in the Q mix for the vocalist. So if this is all the way down, and that could have an impact. So, but this is going to be the more critical one of the balance. Now we'll light a balance between the different channels and what's going to the vocalist there. Okay, on Mac, the user interface is, choppy. The scroll is not in any way smooth using the Magic Mouse. Why is this, and how can it be solved? I personally had a lot of issues with the Magic Mouse, as have many people in many programs. So that's the one mouse I actually wouldn't recommend to people, is the Apple Magic Mouse, because often the sensitivity, it's too sensitive, and you could be making adjustments when you don't think that you are. But I'll just try kind of a large project here to give you sense. This is a pretty big project. Let me load this up. So lots of different samples going on.
I know you're gonna dig this.
So all the real-time effects, automation.
Ven, te invito a que mires aquí por este cristal que ni engaña ni miente. Lo que ves esa gente que no se tiene
So we're about 119 tracks.
Ahora fíjate si
Let's go ahead and we'll just zoom.
Cuando cambia este lente, lo que nos dividía desaparecerá, pues lo que se ve por el cristal somos iguales. Hay que sincerarse y hay que amar. Somos iguales, hermanos.
So just zoom in and out.
Solo Dios nos podrá juzgar, seas rico o pobre, de Francia o Taiwán.
That's down to the sample level.
No importa si tu ropa está estrujada, sin vida no nos queda nada. Dime cuál es tu prioridad. Mira por el cristal, porque así nos vemos todos ante el que hace el juicio final. Somos iguales, nuestras almas no tienen color. Somos iguales, marchando al ritmo de un tambor. Únase, mientras más mejor. Hay que sincerarse y hay que amar.
Getting down to your sample level.
Somos iguales, hermanos, entrego la vida. Solo Dios nos podrá juzgar.
So I don't really have any issues. To me, that wouldn't concern me for performance. But really, and we've had people with the Magic Mouse that have had issues with it. And, and if you look up like sensitivity on Magic Mouse, you'll see lots of people complaining about it. And that mouse tends not to work well with a lot of different programs. So I would check that out. But I don't think the user interface is choppy, and that's a pretty heavy project of, 119 tracks with all the real-time effects going on with, the Grand 3, which is a pretty heavy piano with, 6 or 7 voices in Hallian going on. So So a bunch of EQ. So it seems pretty responsive to me overall. So question, why does the audio playback cut off whenever a new instrument track or effect is introduced? Is there a way around this? Other DAWs have continued playback regardless. So right now it's not currently a gapless audio engine, and I did see that mentioned in the Steinberg surveys that were done after 10.5 was released as one of the options that they're looking at doing. But why they do that is just kind of ensure that the plug-in delay compensation is constantly correct. So that's just a way for it to make sure that the delay compensation is 100% while you're going on. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. What are the links used for in the mix console? What is Q-Link? So we can think of Q-Link as being, so there's several different links that you could do. So if I wanted to take all of these channels and move them all simultaneously while keeping their relative volumes, we could put these into what's called a link group. I'll just do this with a new project here. Okay, so if I have like these, let's say these are my drum tracks and I wanted these to be linked together, I could select these particular tracks and then click on link, and we could choose to link different aspects. So we could give it a name. I wanted to call it my drums. I wanted to link volume, panning, not EQ, but we could do linking sends or inserts, mute solo, listen, automation, read write, routing, selection. So we could choose different components. So now as these are linked, I could just move one of them and it would all move proportionally. And what a quick link allows us to do is if I had these channels and I just wanted to grab all of these at one time, and then I could hold down Alt Shift or Option Shift, and that would enable the quick link. And then at that point, we could keep these linked just without having to define a link group. And then once quick link is turned off, they can go back to functioning independently or whatever is selected. So if I quickly wanted to come here and say these all get panned, I could just kind of select my quick link group there. These will be permanently linked as soon as I disable Q link. At that point, it will just go right there. So we could have that linked in while this is linked. And if I wanted to make this a little softer, you could just hold down, I think it's just the Alt key. Then you could override the link temporarily and then be able to move your different links. So quick link is just like, I just want to take these real quick and move these all down proportionally, or change routing. And we could think of other kind of the other links as more permanently defined. Okay, we have a question. Please cover UV22HR, what it does, and where and when to properly use it. So the UV22 is a dithering algorithm. A lot of people will use it on their stereo out insert as a post fader insert. And what this allows you to do, and it's kind of an older industry standard algorithm, so we'll see it under mastering. And what this is algorithm developed by Apogee. So, and this would allow you to kind of, when working with like a 24-bit file. So let's say if you're at 24-bit file 96K and you wanted to dither it down to a 16-bit 44.1 for, let's say, CD release, or and what this would allow you to do is to basically, what dithering does is it adds special noise into your signal so that you could have kind of the sonic integrity of a high resolution file that you've probably been working with when you deliver a lower resolution file for an audio mix down. So that's when you'd want to use the Apogee UV22 dithering. So, and it could you could experiment with different dithering options, but it's a very common one. So it's often used in like a post fader insert on directly on your master fader before exporting. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. How easy is the drum editor to use versus the piano roll editor? I've always used a piano roll before and other DAWs in the past. Cheers. I think the drum editor has a lot of unique things that you could do with it. So one of the things that is kind of unique to the drum editor that I've always liked is that you're going to have the capability. Let me just. So when we have our drum editor here and we're using something like Groove Agent or VST3 Instruments, have this capability where one, you could actually just click on create drum map from instrument, and then you could actually see the names of the sounds. So when I click here, I could just say, so let's say I just wanted to come here, I could now, and let me just slide this over here real quick so we can. I could see that, okay, we have our kick drum here. So I could just kind of. And so as you kind of go to enter in different sounds, you could actually kind of see, what they are as you. Yeah, you could audition different sounds here. So let's say, okay, I want to do this starting at C1. So we could just kind of come right over here, say, okay, let's put in a kick. And let's say I just want to put in some hi-hat. And what's kind of cool about this also is you could just say, I just want to put in 16th note hi-hats. And I wanted to adjust the velocity. Let's make that velocity. So, you know, I could select my kick drum and I only see my different, the velocities for my kick. I go to my snare, I only see the velocities for my snare. When I select my hi-hat, I only see those particular velocities there. But you could also put in different rhythmic patterns. So let's say if I wanted to put in like an eighth note triplets. Now when I paint in, so you could put in different rhythmic values. So if I only want this snare to be on half notes, you know, so you can put in different rhythmic values as you kind of paint in. So I love being able to see the names of the drum sounds and the ability to edit individual velocities, so you're not kind of guessing which note's velocity you're editing. And then you could also just come here and say show only drum sounds with sound, so you could kind of hide the other drum sounds that you're not using. So those are some advantages of the drum editor that I find that you don't really have access to in the piano key roll editor. You could see Grant on the Hangout. Okay, so I see why can't I drag and drop Cubase 10.5 stock user loops directly into the Contact 6? I don't think it's I think it's more of a limitation of Contact 6, but it could be. So I know, and I don't think this is anything that Steinberg is doing nefariously, but you know, if I wanted to come here and have a groove agent that we could take any stock, you know, drag and drop audio file here. So if I just wanted to audition different, you know, I could just drag these directly to my project window onto a track or make a new track right there. So, and I think it's just that maybe Contact 6 isn't as drag and drop friendly. I don't work with it too much, but I know that if I had an instance of Hallion here, so just go to my Hallion 6, that I could take any sample from here and just drag it right there, and then so I don't think it's a limitation of Steinberg that's doing it. I would think it's going to be kind of a limitation of how Contact is dealing with it. Maybe if it was a VST3 instrument, maybe, but I'm not sure. I'm not a developer, so. Okay, so we had a question in Cubase Elements. Is there a way to link channels? Also, is there a way to link mixer channels to either side? So let's take a quick look. I think I have Cubase Elements up here. I'll open this up quickly. So just like we had seen before, I could come over here and do the Q link, which is Alt plus Shift or Alt Option plus Shift, and be able to link the channels. And if we wanted to anchor channels like to the left or right, we would just click on, let's come over here. Let's see if we can do it in the Elements version. So in the Pro versions, you have the ability to kind of fix channels to the right. It looks like it's kind of doing it here by default, like with your right channel. Let me just add a bunch more channels. So it looks like it's already, like your inputs are going to be kind of set here on the left-hand side and anchored. And then as you scroll, you could have the outputs automatically assigned. But in the full version of Cubase, and I'll show you that, I'll just exit out of this. You have the option of picking which channels are linked. So when you go to your mix console, in the full one, you could go to your visibility and then click on zones, and then you could pick particular channels to kind of anchor to the left or to the right in your project. So if you always wanted your stereo out to be fixed to the right-hand side, and that seems to be the default behavior in Elements, and you have the ability of doing your Q link in Elements, but not to define linked groups. Okay, so you see in Cubase Elements, is there a way to get the big meter on the right? I don't know. Let's open it up. I knew I shouldn't have closed it. All right. So you're just going to see the VSTI and the media. So the bigger versions will allow you to have the different metering options on the right-hand side. Okay, so just see, Mr. Greg, you will support high DPI mode, 4K screens, and next maintenance. If you're doing high DPI, since Cubase 10, that is supported high DPI, and it will support different scalings better than others. But Cubase does it. But I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question about 4K, if it was 4K video or high DPI, but currently, Cubase does support the high DPI scaling. So and this is probably more in the 4Ks. Like I can use any plugins with my screens, even when I change display settings. It really depends on the plugin itself. So a lot of plugins aren't high DPI capable. So so you're saying you can't, and that's not really kind of up to us. It's really helpful if the plugin supports high DPI scaling. I know there's a lot of companies that are kind of working on getting the high DPI scaling going for them. So question, greetings. Is there any way to use warp quantize on multiple grouped tracks? When I use warp quantize one of a group, it just warps to one selected, even though all are grouped. That's currently how the implementation is. What I've seen a lot of people do is if you need to warp, like let's say between like a DI guitar track and an amp guitar track, and you're doing editing on one and you want it to be applied, is just to use the audio alignment panel. And then the one that you do warp, set that as the source, and then set the other tracks as destination and just do the audio alignment function. That seems to work well for a lot of people. So I see, Greg, why do you, some tracks in your full screen mix console show VU meter and some show waveform? So it'll show the waveform. And let me just jump back. Probably might have been in this project. So if there's, if it's a MIDI track or if it's a group track where there's no actual waveform, so say if we play this a little bit. So these are all of our group tracks. So when you see that mix, because what we see is the actual waveform from the audio file here. And if there's no audio file, like on a group or on a MIDI track or a virtual instrument track, that's why you don't see the waveform in those meters. So the meters will show you the waveform of the audio event. So I see question, is there a way to link channels to change all colors at once? So let's say if I wanted to change all these colors, I would just go to like Alt Control or Alt Shift or Option Shift C, and then have those tracks selected, and then you could just and that would open up your color selector tool, and then you could change all those colors. So once they're selected, hit Alt or Option plus Shift plus C, and then you could just switch all multiple colors simultaneously. So hi Greg, hope you're doing well. In Cubase 10.5 I am, thank you for asking. In Cubase 10.5 I have Contact 5, but sometimes it crashes. Is there a trick or tips on how to get Contact to work? I'm not the best Contact expert, but make sure that if we have instruments like Callion, sometimes spreading the CPU load with, depending on what instruments that you're using can actually, like running fewer instances within, if you're doing like a heavy library, fewer instances within fewer instruments within fewer instances. So you could try running one or more, and that could allocate the CPU cores a little better. And sometimes, Contact isn't taking advantage of some of the VST3 capabilities because it's still a VST2 instrument. But a lot of times, and you may also have, I'm sure Contact has a setting like this where you could set, sorry about my squeaky mic stand. But you could set the different preload amounts, and depending how much RAM you have, you may want to increase like the preload amount of how much is coming from the hard disk versus RAM of your system. And I would try setting that. Okay. So, a question: can you add subtitles on all the Hangouts videos to help users to skip to what they need to learn? So, all the Hangouts that we've done this year are indexed, and I think that they are all closed captioned, and that's just something YouTube does, except for one Hangout we did that was 4 hours and 2 minutes, and I guess YouTube doesn't do closed captioning or automatic closed captioning if it's more than 4 hours. So, but all the indexes are done and they're pinned to the top. So every single index I'll go back through afterwards. I'll probably be doing it late tonight and going through all of the topics that we covered today. So you could immediately jump to different areas. So. Okay, so see question from John Hinchy. When rendering a track to audio, is there a way to set the default name for the new track and the audio file to be based on the name of the source track as it is now? My new track is always stereo out. Yeah, I've noticed this too, and I've mentioned this. I think depending on what it could depend on the settings, and it's kind of a goofy thing, I realize. I'll just jump to another project here. So if I have just a let's say if I have this, and I'll just put this on its own track. Make this a little easier. So if I just have this selected, it will go through, and we can do a render in place. Let me activate the project first. So right now, if I just choose to do dry, then when we render that, that keeps the name. But if you go through the channel settings to render it with the effects, which is probably makes sense, where most people would do it, then I think it would kind of carry the name over through them that's using through the mix bus. So now it'll probably be, let me just check my render settings again. So if I do complete signal path, then, so it could depend on what aspects that you're setting, but I agree that it should kind of maintain the same name. And I'll mention that again. Thanks, John. Okay, so see, question wondering about using Groove Agent with the very basic MPC controller, wondering how easy it is to use if it as a standalone application for live performance, similar to Ableton. So we have lots of people, just doing all of their productions in Groove Agent and being able to trigger directly from, it's not, if you have the full Groove Agent, you could treat that as a standalone application, but lots of people are doing all of their, MPC style live production using Groove Agent without any problems. Okay, so we have a question. Talk about phase alignment. Thank you. So let's just do a new project here. All right, so there's a couple different ways that we could adjust a phase. So let's say we have two of the same audio tracks going on. And one of the things you could do is just invert the phase here. So you could do that from the information line, but if you wanted to also just kind of come directly here. So let's say we have these two tracks. Also another way of doing checking for phase is I'll just put this into quick loop. And if we go to like the mixer channels, is you could have an invert phase. And often why you hear those frequencies canceling out is if you have, once you kind of invert the phase and you kind of look at it, just make it very large here. And let's see if this is reflected. So what you see is as these waveforms are going up, when the phase is inverted, these are going down. So that can cause a lot of the frequencies to cancel out. And sometimes you may run into situations if you have like a bass that was recorded with a DI and a bass that was recorded through an amp that you may have to just flip the phase on one of them. So, and then all of a sudden you go, wow, it sounds huge. And, and often you see it with drums too. So you may want to just go in and, just looking at it visually to see that where one is going up, that the other one isn't going down. So you could just kind of check the phase relationship between different tracks that way. Okay, so question, there a way to do pitch bend on an audio track, a la sampler pitch bend, for example. You have an audio file and you want to bend it down a fifth over a 2-bar time span. So yeah, let's just come here. So let's say if I wanted to take this down, I'll select that range of the file and just remove this track. So if I go to audio to processes, you can go to pitch shift. And then you'll probably just see where you could do you could set your intervals here. But if you go to envelope, at this way you could say you wanted to transpose -7 tones, which would be a perfect fifth. And now as we listen to it, you can choose if you want a time correction or not. So that's a way to do it as well. So okay, so let's move on. Hi, can you please talk about how to get audio, the beginning and end of the audio loop to snap to tempo? I'm new to Cubase and I can never change the tempo if I want. Thanks. Okay, so let's say if we have, I'll just remove that process. So let's say if I listen to this drum loop and I put my click on, that these aren't kind of lining up with the click. So what you could do is a lot of times when you have audio files, you can, if you know what the tempo is of the audio file, and if you're working with different loops, you can place it into musical mode. Then once it's in musical mode, and once you kind of know what the origin tempo is, and as you record a file into Cubase, it will extrapolate, it'll basically extract the tempo from the tempo that you're recording. So it will be tempo stamped. And then as you put it into musical mode here, whatever tempo you have, it'll now just kind of automatically, let's slow it down. So if I want to be 144, that will automatically kind of fit your different areas. Another thing that you could do, depending on which mode you're in, there's also a sizing mode where you can say sizing applies time stretch, and you could just drag that over and say, I want that to fit into that amount of time. And that will stretch the audio. Okay, hi Greg. I'm occasionally having some choppy playback, not CPU overload, as I can see that it's not spiking and there's no audio dropout, but it's just cutting the playback out for a second. Any ideas? Try, usually when you're doing this, you may have to raise the buffer. So if you go to your studio menu, to studio setup, select your audio interface and go to your control panel, and then you could try to raise your buffer up a little bit, and that should make it a little easier for your computer to manage the project. So you may have to actually just increase the buffer a little bit as the project grows. Okay, hi Greg. When I make new Halion 6 sounds and Groove Agent sounds, how and where do I save these new patches so that they won't overwrite existing Cubase 10.5? It really, just wherever I don't think you could overwrite the existing ones, that they'll be kind of protected. But let's say if I wanted to go here, and let me just revert this quickly. All right, so let's say if I have like maybe, different samples here. So if I wanted to take these and drag them on and make my own kits. So in Groove Agent, to make your kit, all you'd really have to do now is just choose to, right click on the agent itself, and then you could choose to export the kit with the samples, and you could store it anywhere on your computer's hard drive. So if you say, okay, I just wanted to come here to, your library, to applications, or to desktop, wherever you want it to, and then you're able to just simply open that up. If you had that, and so once you kind of save that, you could just, look for it, and, and then you could see all the different samples wherever you choose to. So when you go to export the kit with the samples, you give it a name. So it's called June 2nd. We could save it to our downloads folder. And you could give it your own name if you wanted to. So kind of whatever in different metadata that you want. And then you could just simply call that up. And if you just save the project, that'll be recalled. If you have this in Halion, it's really just kind of dragging our different samples in. So if you wanted to have that sample on these keys, and I wanted this on this particular key, so at this point we could now right click and you could export a layer, and you could just simply export to samples or change your sample folder all right there. So just once you're in this particular area, you could just right click and export your samples in a very similar way. Okay, Greg, is there a way to unglue two track events so I can use the fade out handles? I cut some stuff and I cut some stuff out and then used glue to put the two remaining segments together. The fade handle is gone. All right, so let's say if I take this, and then I split, and then I wanted to glue these together. Now, when we do that, that takes it from an event to a part. So once I do this, then you don't really have the same event handles. So if you go to your audio menu and then choose to dissolve part, then you could just have both of them selected and your event handles will work and function again. So try going to your audio menu again to dissolve part. And then at that point, your fade handles will come back. Okay, so we have clarifications for earlier. How to get a file over installed VST instruments and plugins. I want to have all installed VST and plugins as a text file to print out for an easy index. This actually, I think, what just happened in 10.52 would do the trick for you. Thanks for the clarification. Sorry if I was being dense. But if you go to your VST plugin manager, that now there is a plugin report. So I'll just save this to, I'll just save it to desktop. And you might be able to see, I think this would show you all of your plugins. I don't have a lot of third-party plugins on my work machine, but I think that the plugin report would do that for you. So a couple of third-party ones in there. So again, go to, this just came out last week in 10.52. To the VST plugin manager, and then just click on plugin report and then have that generated for you. Okay, so Greg, I have two parts on an instrument track, and I want dead silence between. I tried to automate mute between the two parts, but I'm still hearing the tail of the first part when I unmute the second part. All right, so let me just see if I can recreate this quickly. Okay, so let's see if I maybe have something like that. I'll just go ahead and sequence a note in here. Sorry, let me just solo this. And I'll just hit record this time. That would be helpful. Okay, so so it says you want dead silence. You have two parts on an instrument track, and I want dead silence between. I tried to automate mute and cut between the two parts, but I'm still hearing the tail of the first part when I unmute. So let me just see if I come here and let's say I cut this out. Just see. It's kind of a cool sound. So it says you tried to that you're hearing parts. Are you? I think if you have effects going on, that might be causing it to hang over. But let me just try. I'll try another sound just out of curiosity, like maybe a pad shop. So let me just come here. All right, so if you want a dead silence between them. So I think, if you're hearing stuff, and it could depend on the instrument if it's choosing to hold. But let's say if I just do a mute automation here. Sorry about that. Let me just be less annoying this way. So it's just that, and I'll mute this upper track. So just doing a mute automation seems to work for me, but maybe if you have effects on it or effects within the instrument, those effects are still ringing through. Okay. Going through. Thanks for all the great comments and wonderful questions. If you've learned a tip or trick on the Hangout, please feel free to like the video. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you could, make sure you do that so you're notified of future Hangouts. Okay, I know we had some people that had sent questions in advance, so let's go take a look at some of those. I know, and I mentioned before that we may have to wrap up a little bit early. I had to get onto a conference call at 3:30, so I apologize in advance. So it's not going to be our usual kind of marathon hangouts. Okay, so covered a couple of these already. Okay, is there a way to limit Cubase's timeline feature, which zooms the project via a click and drag and jumps the playback cursor to the clicked location? I only want zooming, and I do not want the song play position to jump where I'm zooming. Is there a key combination to limit the feature to zoom only? So if we kind of zoom in using our what we could do, let me see if there's so, when we do the zoom from the timeline, let me just see. I don't think that there is a restriction, a modifier key to restrict it. But what a lot of people do is just like, as they're playing, just G and H, and that will keep the playhead cursor. But there isn't a way to modify, because here I think the benefit is to be able to navigate and zoom. But if you wanted to just have that zoom, just hit G and H, and that should help you with that. Okay, so a question just about Cubase 10.5, my first DAW coming from analog world, 20 plus years of mixers, etc. Very PC savvy though. So a common noob question I would appreciate very closely every hangout. Is best way to get started in Cubase, included recommended videos, books, etc. So there is, check out like the Cubase YouTube channel, which is like this video is a series on. Check out the hangouts and learn. But the different aspects that you've learned with mix consoles are all very applicable here. One piece of advice I would pass on is dealing with file management. So one tip from a newbie perspective is like when you go to do a new project is I always recommend people do the prompt for project location. So when you're doing a new project, it'll ask you exactly what folder. And one of the things coming from kind of a more traditional studio perspective to a DAW is, file management wasn't so much of an issue if you're using tape machines. You just kind of record it on a tape. But anytime that you record audio, you probably want to put each project into its own unique folder. So we'll give this just a name, come over here. And now as you record files and you save files, it can go directly in there. As we go to record audio tracks, something to be aware of is, if we're starting off with like 8 tracks that we're doing, is to name each track. So let's say, okay, kick, snare, hit the tab key, that'll take you to the next track. Let's say tom high, tom mid, floor tom, let's say overhead L, overhead right. So name the tracks, because now as you go to record these tracks, so you want to arm the tracks here. And now as you do this, you'll notice that the names of the files will be carried over from the names in the tracks. So think of file management, I think, is really critical coming from a traditional studio perspective. So make sure you do that. But like the signal flow, all of that stuff will work the same. You'll have your send effects, inserts that are dedicated. So all right, so we had a question about a macro. It says I created the following macro named previous marker plus pre-roll 2-bar, transport, locator, locate selection. So I guess the goal of the macro is to make sure that wherever we're at, if there is a marker track, let me just put a marker in here. Is to automatically go back and let me just put my marker here. So what they want to do with the macro is to navigate back to the marker track and then go back 2 bars. And sometimes what you see in macros is that some of the operations could be too fast when executed in a macro, and they can be kind of skipped. So what I did for this particular macro was I just went to key commands, and instead of going back 2, I think it was too fast. And sometimes I've made macros where you open up windows, like turn the transport bar on and off, and then off, so that it could add a little bit of space. So what I did to make this macro work consistently for me was I just did the almost 3 bars. So I did transport to previous locator and then nudge the bar 3 times. So now my play position is here. I will execute the macro. by saying previous marker nudge 2 bars, and then it'll go and but another way you could do it is also just to activate the pre-count. So if you come here, you could also or activate the pre-roll. So when you actually jump to, you know, at this point we could navigate to this marker, and then with a 2-measure pre-roll, it'll just automatically play back. So wherever we start here, I could just say, and we do this just by in the pre-roll area, and you may have to activate it on your transport, pre-roll and post-roll. So I just had that set to 2 measures. So you could just have the pre-roll activated as well. So at that point, I could just say, okay, anytime I hit play, it rolls back 2 bars. So you can practice a guitar part along with it. So that's another option to be aware of. Okay, so we had a question regarding automation. About how to, let's say if we have automation going on a particular track here. Okay, and how to kind of, says I very often want to modify a certain part, maybe make it quieter, but I want to keep the relative automation intact. Instead, the range selection creates new automation points that are square-like shape. I was wondering if there's a smooth way to do that sort of function. If you have a range selection automation lane. So if you come here, you could just kind of select those 2 different points. And if you wanted to, tilt it a little bit to smooth it out, you could just go to the upper corner handles here, and then you could smooth it out. So again, you could just kind of select the range of automation that you want to affect. And as you do that, it puts a new point there, but go to the upper right-hand corner or upper left-hand corner handles, and then you could smooth those transitions out as well. And then kind of bring that down if you need to. And just seeing in our comment about, an option for, to play upon first MIDI input note, and it's been common in even a Roland MC500 sequencer. So, that's why we kind of have our, again, as we showed in the last Hangout, more, if I have an instrument track here and I was just doodling, at that point, I could hit stuff with my MIDI controller and then just hit the retrospective record, and then all the different data will automatically appear. And that's going to be probably more accurate than, instantiating a actual MIDI note message to start recording. It depends, especially if you have because we'll have composers that may be recording on 3,000 tracks, and if you miss that note across 3,000 tracks with the serial nature of MIDI, it's a little different than an MC500. So okay, and I think Taylor had emailed a question about the sampler track, how he wasn't able necessarily to see all the different components, including the so especially kind of with the warping functions that he wasn't able to see that. And I think really what it is, Taylor, is your screen resolution looks like it's pretty small. So if you could maybe make your screen resolution a little higher, so like this resolution is a 1920 by 1080, so it's a pretty common screen resolution. So maybe if you make your screen resolution a little taller, I think that you would see all the controls kind of pop back to life. Okay, we have just a couple more minutes. We're at the wrap up and get on a conference call. Sorry, it's a shorter hangout than usual. I know we had some people that sent some questions in. We haven't gotten to all of them, but let's see if we can maybe get through one more here. Okay, Okay, can a MIDI processing or generating VST such as Scalar 2 be inserted on a MIDI track for recording the generated MIDI, but also have the MIDI routed to separate instrument track for driving an instrument? This would create a more real-time workflow and bypass the step of dragging a MIDI clip from Scalar and putting it into Cubase. I haven't really worked with Scalar. There's definitely the provision for plugins to generate MIDI on the output page. So, if you have different functions, you'll often see them show up. Like if I have a instrument track here, so let's say if I have a Groove Agent or let's say Groove Agent SE, that now I could see Groove Agent SE as when I go to my MIDI inputs for other tracks, we can see Groove Agent SE. So it's, if you don't see it as an available MIDI input, it's just how that plugin is written. I try to watch a quick video of it online, but I don't know if it's only kind of a drag and drop or if it could actually kind of route the MIDI data back into itself. It's obviously a bit more involved to do that, but more practical, but it may not be as not all host formats or programs would allow you to do that. So that could be why it's kind of drag and drop. But it could definitely be done inside of Cubase. If it could work with Scalar, it's really up to if Scalar has actually done that. Okay, let me check time. I'm going to have to wrap up. We'll be doing another hangout on Friday at 1 o'clock. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. For people, if you want to email questions in advance, you can please go to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. And you could email me there. We'll try to get to some of the questions we didn't get to that were mailed in advance on the next hangout. I just had to rush to get onto a conference call. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions that you've had for the hangout. I really appreciate that. It's always a joy to help people and hopefully, teach a couple tips and tricks. If you've learned something new, please feel free to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. And we'll do the next hangout on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern time, which would be the same time as this hangout started. And I hope that during our current pandemic that everyone is please staying healthy and safe. And we'll see you on the next hangout. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on Friday. Goodbye.